Hey, what's up, guys? Just an extended video today on today's Philosophy Friday topic, which is materialism. Although materialism faded out of relevance and importance in my own philosophical journey long ago, and by the way, that's part of having a sort of philosophical awakening and, you know, coming to terms with your own truth seeking filter and learning to tune in with that is realizing that materialism is incoherent. It's a necessary condition for being able to see the truth and to, discern deception and to be able to apply logic, you know? And so, although I've put materialism way in the past in my own personal journey, it always seems to creep up to relevance in society and culture and politics uh, all the time, really. And people will appeal to material arguments without consideration of the larger patterns, concepts, philosophies that are actually governing a situation. But to be a materialist is not to really realize that one is a materialist. Is not to realize that there is more beyond physical reality. And so all of your evidence in support of a claim, any claim, doesn't matter, logically has to be confined, be limited to that material, physical aspect of reality. Has to be limited to stuff, to physical matter. But it's funny, this is self-refuting. To argue a point at all, to assume truth exists, to have any intention behind your words, behind your actions, is to presuppose that things well outside of material reality exist, such as your own values that you live by, and your own meaning and purpose that you're trying to live in accordance with. And reasoning itself is a non-material thing. Logic is not something that has even a material correlate. Logic is an abstract is an abstract thing, and materialism doesn't allow for abstract objects to exist. It is the philosophy that the only things that are real have their essence, their basis in material substance. So it really is self-refuting to argue on behalf of materialist or any material claim. Because to argue at all requires the use of reasoning, which has its basis in logic, which is an abstract concept. I made a video a few years ago about 5 reasons why materialism cannot explain consciousness. Lots of neuroscientists are obsessed with this idea of consciousness being in the brain somewhere, like in some combination of brain functions, or maybe even in isolation in one, atomic place in the brain. And they want to uncover that. But there's been no success whatsoever in this endeavor. I mean, it's completely insane to think that consciousness is that sort of thing. It's not a physical thing. But in doing so, in looking for that, they're presupposing this philosophy. They're not considering that consciousness could be a state of being, and that a state of being is a different sort of thing than a piece of physical matter. And so, consciousness is, I think, a safe assumption It's safe. It's one of those few things that's safe for us to assume exists, that we have it. That so many things that result from it, such as free will and meaning, and our connection to each other and our connection to the world. To presuppose that there's something called consciousness that exists is not wrong, in my opinion. It's just reasonable, given how little physical reality can explain. And so, if we think that consciousness is physical, then, well, what form does it take? Does it take the form of a single cell or a single atom? If that were to be the case, then you'd have to come up with some material explanation for oneness. If we can reduce something to an atom, a singular entity, which by material definition cannot occupy the same space at the same time as any other singular thing, then what we're left with is a reality of logic, the rule of identity, that the law of identity that says that everything is a thing unto itself. And so we would have to come up with some material explanation for oneness, other than the fact that something cannot take up the same place at the same time as any other thing, and that law itself, as for all laws and all rules, is an abstraction, is something itself non-material, is a principle, so, and also, let's say, consciousness is like an interplay between physical cells or atoms in the brain, certain brain functions. It's like a sort of relationship, right? An interplay between two or more states of affairs going on inside the head. That still presupposes a relationship. It still presupposes an energy that is created between two things that itself is not intrinsic to either of those things, those individual things. So materialism can't account for relationships either. And then on the whole, it can't account for consciousness itself, because consciousness is not a physical entity. Consciousness is something more like our relationship with the outside world. It's not merely our biological responses to external stimuli. If that were the case, then we could certainly not direct and redirect our thoughts, our actions. We certainly would not have free will. But it is clear that on some level, we do have free will. So it doesn't follow that that interplay, that relationship between us as subjective beings and the objective world, or any mere object, can have its root in material reality, because there is something created as a result of those two things interacting with each other. So it's funny, but it's absolutely clear that materialism cannot account for anything. It can't account for patterns, concepts, relations of ideas, states of being on the macro level, and it cannot account for individuality on the atomic level. It can't account for identity of one. Even if two ones share all of their physical traits in common and seem identical in appearance, there are different levels of reality. Like this phone I'm holding right now has physical characteristics. We could define it in terms of its material substance, but that would only, at best, explain how it is that this substance, this object appears this way. It doesn't even explain how it works, because at that point you have to give reasons for why all of the components together create something that works. But then there's another level of the reality of this phone, and it's, I think, only slightly above the material reality in importance, in philosophical importance, in my opinion, and that's the teleological reality of it. What is a phone in terms of its purpose? It's a calling device. It's a texting device. So it's a communication device. We can also use the internet with it. So it's an information sharing device. That's its teleology, its usage. So we can define it in that way too. But that, may or may not describe its full essence. We can actually use the phone to do anything we want with it. We can use it as a murdering tool if we want. We could kill someone with it by bashing them in the head repeatedly, or by suffocation, by stuffing it down their throat. So there's nothing intrinsic to the phone itself that says it's a calling and texting and information sharing device. So there are different levels of reality, and material reality, which is what science generally deals with, the inner workings of things, like what material substance does something consist of, and can we put patterns together to extract some meaning from that, some greater definition of that. But that itself requires abstraction and help from other fields and other, methods of reasoning and ways of thinking in order to really have anything behind it. So, yeah, from the micro to the macro level, materialism itself, it's a self-refuting philosophy, and it cannot account for anything. Most notably, it cannot account for itself, because any good theory, any good worldview has to be able to account for theorizing itself and its own existence as a theory within that construct, that conceptual framework. So that's my extended video on materialism today. It's crazy that we have to keep talking about this because it's such a shallow philosophy. And once you board the truth train, you see that. But nevertheless, it can be fun. If I have any advice for you, though, it is not to waste time arguing with a materialist. By arguing at all, they are refuting their own philosophy. And it follows from that they are simply unaware of the philosophy that has grappled them, has grappled their thinking. And at the end of the day, they're not really thinking. If they're a materialist, they're not allowed to think by their own logic. So we have to presuppose that certain things exist, logic, reasoning, truth itself, for starters. And then we go from there, So whatever worldview you have, philosophically, metaphysically, you can argue on behalf of that as long as that theory can account for itself. But materialism cannot. So don't waste your time. Truth comes to people when they are ready, as if it's some kind of conscious entity itself, So let those people be. Let them wallow in their own misery if that's what's required of them in order to for them to grow philosophically. But just be the bigger person and draw boundaries around relationships with those people, and choose not to enter into certain discussions whenever they arise, because their perception is incapable of grasping anything outside of that philosophy while refuting itself, ironically enough. Anyway, that's my video. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Cheers.